Hi all, in this article we're going to describe thermofan control on the modular ECUs. Now you might be already thinking, why do we need a special control algorithm for thermofans? Can't we just switch an output based on coolant temperature? Well, yeah, you can, but to control thermofan nicely there are some other things that you want to do as well. That's the way we used to do on the select ECUs, but we came across some problems. So for example, with the air conditioner turned on, you want to be able to have the thermofans turn on as well so that it cools down the condenser. Secondly, you want to have the thermofans come on by default if there's no coolant temperature sensor or the sensor's developed a fault for some reason. Also, you want to be able to increase the idle effort when the thermofans turn on, because thermofans draw a lot of current and this can present a fair bit of mechanical load to an engine, especially a little one. And also, ideally, you'd be able to bump the idle effort up slightly before the thermofans turn on. So this gives the engine some time to stabilise rather than having a dip in the RPM when the fans first come on. So with all these slightly complicated factors, we decided to implement a thermofan function in the ECU rather than rely on having a generic output and then a whole bunch of things around it to make it behave nicely. Now let's have a look at the settings available, and these are all found in the functions thermofan section in the software. The first is the number of thermofan stages. So this can be any number from 1 to 3 and represents the number of different speeds, if you like, or stages of the thermofan turning on. So for example, if you've just got one thermofan, then you'd only have one stage. What a lot of people do is they'll have two thermofans, but they'll be run off the one output from the ECU, obviously through two relays, and they both turn on together, and then that also would be a single stage installation. Another option is to have a separate relay for each of the two fans and connect them both back to the ECU on two separate outputs. So that way when the engine gets a little bit too warm, you can turn on one fan, and if it's much too warm, then you can turn on both fans. So that would be a two-stage installation. Now some fans on OEM cars actually have 4 wires on them, so you can run them at low speed or high speed. And the other option that you can do, if you feel like it, is that you can run 2 fans in series, and that way each one only gets 6 volts and they only run at about half speed. And that can be your first stage, is to turn on both fans at low speed, then second stage could be turn on one at full speed, and then third stage should be turn on both at full speed. So that would be a 3-stage installation. Now a separate output pin on the ECU is required for each stage that you want to run. So in an example of a 3-stage installation, you would have one output set as thermofan stage 1 or higher, one output set as thermofan stage 2 or higher, and one output set as thermofan stage 3 or higher. And that way, when it's on stage 3, then all 3 outputs are active. When it's on stage 1, only the first output's active. And when you're in stage 2, then the first 2 outputs are active. The next setting is the temperature for each stage to be activated. So for example, in a 2-stage installation, you would have 2 separate temperature thresholds. When the coolant goes above the first temperature, the first stage will activate. And then when the coolant temperature goes above the second temperature, then it'll go to the second stage and both fans will turn on. The next setting is the hysteresis, which is the amount of temperature that you must drop below the threshold to switch off the fan. So as an example, if your threshold's set to 100 degrees and your hysteresis is 2 degrees, then the fan will turn on when you get above 100 degrees, but it will need to go down below 98 degrees for it to turn off. The next settings are the additional idle efforts, which is a percentage for each stage of thermofan activation. So for example, if you enter 3% for additional idle effort for thermofan stage 1, then that means that when the first stage thermofan activates, the ECU will add 3% to the idle duty cycle, or the effort, which could translate to a number of steps or a movement of an electronic throttle or whatever, and that helps stabilise the idle to compensate for the extra load from the thermofan. And the final setting is the delay. So when the coolant temperature first exceeds the threshold, the idle effort is increased in accordance with the idle effort percentage that we just talked about, and then after a short delay, that's when the thermofan output is turned on. So this allows the engine to increase in idle speed a little bit before the fan turns on, which helps avoid the dip that sometimes happens. Now in addition to this logic I've just described, the thermofan is also always active when the air conditioner is on, or if there's a coolant temperature sensor fault. And the software also shows you the current thermofan activation stage and also the current coolant temperature. Now the outputs are configured in the usual way. So go to the outputs page and select a free output, and you select that as being thermofan speed 1 or greater. And then that will turn on, as soon as the first stage thermofan is activated. And similarly, you'll need other ones for any other stages that you're running. Now, once you have it all working and the thermofans are activating correctly, this is the procedure to set the additional idle effort. Firstly, ensure that closed loop idle is working correctly. Then what you can do is you can watch the idle effort before the thermofans turn on, that is, with the thermofan stage equal to 0. And then after the thermofan first stage turns on, you can see what the idle effort has changed to. And the difference between those two is what you need to set for the idle effort. And you can do the same for the higher thermofan activation stages as well. Now, just one more point, if the engine actually doesn't get hot enough at idle to activate the higher stages, or if you're impatient like I am, you can artificially cause the thermofan to activate by setting the temperature threshold to a lower value. Once you're happy with the additional idle effort, then you can adjust the delay that gives the smoothest idle response when you turn on the thermofan. Generally, the delay is going to be fairly short, like about 200 milliseconds. If the delay is much longer, then the closed loop idle control will actually start to activate to pull the idle back down again. And if the delay is too short, then it won't have enough of an effect to mitigate the dip. Now, there's not too much to troubleshoot with thermofan installation, but the only thing that I'd say is that if it appears that the thermofan's coming on all the time, but you have a working coolant temperature sensor and it's reading correctly and that sort of thing, then one thing that I've seen happens is that people set it up as a 2-stage thermofan, even though they're only using 1 stage. And if their second stage activation temperature is 0 degrees, for example, then that means that even if that's less than the first stage activation temperature of 85 degrees or 100 degrees or whatever, then the ECU will see that the temperature is higher than the stage 2 temperature, and it will go straight to stage 2 thermofan activation. So in that case, the solution is obviously to set it for 1 stage instead of 2 stages. Thank you very much, and stay cool.